Hello everyone, I'm Suparna Ghosh Jairath and I'm here to interact with you to discuss food systems and their role in diet-related non-communicable diseases. I'm also going to discuss the complex association of environmental change, food systems, and non-communicable diseases. To give you an outline of the presentation, I'm briefly going to discuss about global burden of non-communicable diseases, nutrition transition followed by food systems transition, environmental change, food systems, and non-communicable diseases, food systems to address sustainable development goals, and sustainable food systems and their potential to address non-communicable diseases. Now, if we look at the global estimates of proportion of healthy years lost due to non-communicable diseases, in the past 3 decades, it has risen from 43% to 64%. And now if we look at the epidemiological transition, we can see that the rate of decrease of communicable maternal, neonatal, and nutritional disorders burden has accelerated, while the rate of increase of non-communicable disease burden has also accelerated at the same time. This leads us to discuss about the nutrition transition scenario. We can define nutrition transition as the changes that the population experience in quality and quantity of dietary behaviors and patterns, shifts in diets and energy expenditure with economic, demographic, and epidemiological transition happening simultaneously. All this go hand in hand with other lifestyle related factors such as physical activity, work and family environment, and general health and socioeconomic well-being, ultimately influencing our energy expenditure. That is how we are burning our calories. And on top of that, modernization, urbanization, economic development, and increases in wealth has led to predictable shifts in our diet by changing our food environment. And these transitions are closely linked with industrialization of our food systems, technological changes and globalization, which is actually flooding our markets with huge volumes of processed and ultra processed foods, and the rising consumption of these ultra processed foods made from processed substances or refined ingredients from whole foods that are undergoing series of industrial processes, and these foods may have implication on rising our risk of developing non-communicable diseases. This slide provides information on stages of nutrition transition, and this draws upon the theoretical description of the different patterns that were observed in nutrition transition. So what we started as pattern one, where we were hunters and gatherers, we were collecting diverse wild plants and animal foods, we were active, labor intensive activities were happening, people were lean, robust, tall, high rates of diseases existed. There was low fertility rate and low life expectancy. Then came pattern two, when we were settling as agriculturalists. We had cereal dominated diets, still performing labor intensive activities, not processing food so much, and nutritional deficiency disorders emerged. And there was high fertility rate, high MCH mortality, and low life expectancy. Then came pattern three, receding famine, where the diets still were starchy, low fat, high fiber, low variety diets. Labor intensive activities were happening along with some leisure time, and MCH deficiencies were still evident, and we were also seeing nutritional disorders like stunting. There was, however, slow mortality decline. Then was pattern 4, or the pattern where there is increased consumption of processed foods like foods that are rich in fat, salt, and sugar, sugary beverages. There is shift of technology in work and leisure, and sedentarism was setting in. And we were seeing high prevalence of obesity, non-communicable diseases, and Medical cures were available to keep us alive. So there was accelerated life expectancy, shift to increased nutrition related non communicable diseases, and increased percentage disability years. And then comes pattern 5, where there is behavior change happening. There is a shift from ultra processed foods to minimally processed foods. Low calorie beverages are being consumed, and replacement of sedentarism with purposeful activities like going to gyms, going for walks, and all, like sort of including active behavior in the lifestyle. And there is reduced body fatness, nutrition related non communicable diseases, improved disease prevention, and extended healthy aging and reduced nutrition related non communicable diseases. Looking at this pattern, we now understand that many of the low middle income countries, including India, are rapidly moving from nutrition transition patterns 3 to 4. And since this transition is very rapid, we are actually experiencing dual burden of malnutrition. That is, while we are still transitioning from the end of famine phase, but we are going towards overconsumption also in a very rapid rate, as a result of which there is increased risk of non-communicable diseases. And while we understand nutrition transition now, we must understand how is the food environment also transitioning. But before that, let us understand what is food environment. Food environment is the collective physical, economic, policy, and socio-cultural surroundings, opportunities, and conditions that influence people's food and beverage choices and nutritional status. Food environment has been described as an interface where people interact with their wider food systems to acquire and consume foods. And in simple terms, food environment can be defined under a kind of a typology wherein we can have natural food environment and built food environment. So natural food environment would include the wild food environment, as people were relying on during the pattern 1 of nutrition transition, where we access the natural forests, jungles, the natural lakes and water sources and open pastures to acquire food from there. Then is the cultivated food environment, which is also under natural food environment, where we have aquaculture, our farmlands, our orchards and gardens, etc. Then comes built food environment. And built food environment basically is something which has a structure. So we have informal markets, like we have our bazaars, we have hearts, we have weekly markets. We also have formal food environment, wherein we have these supermarkets, superstores, and other food-based government programs, wherein from a structured outlet we are accessing food for our basic requirements. Now, if we look at the food environment, the assessment of food environment can be done under two broad domains. One is the external food environment, and the other is the personal food environment. So the external food environment is includes factors like availability of the foods in the market, their prices, the market regulations like what foods are safe to be consumed and should be sold, and other regulations imposed by various regulatory agencies. Also, the vendors and the product properties are something which characterize the external food environment. On the other hand, the personal food environment includes factors like affordability. I am going to bring a food to my house if I'm able to purchase it with and only I'm able to purchase it only when it is affordable to me in my on for my pocket. Accessibility means whether I can access the market, I have a vehicle, or I can walk down and access that food. Desirability means the preferences, the acceptability, the taste, the desires, the attitude, and the culture, and the knowledge, and the skills which makes a food desirable. And lastly, it's the convenience. That is the relative time and effort required for preparing a certain kind of food. And that is where we understand that how the personal food environment merges with the external food environment and sort of helps us make food choices for our day-to-day life. Food environment then actually determines the diet that we consume. And if we talk about the food environment, what are the different avenues from where our food is coming? It's the food industry, the products, where they are placed, their prices, how these products are promoted. The government. The government also dictates the food environment that we are accessing by regulations and laws, fiscal policies, and other health promotion efforts. And of course, we have our society, which tells us what is our traditional cuisine, what is our cultural and religious value and preferences that sort of dictates what food is coming to our household level, to our houses. Individual factors, on the other hand, talks about our personal preferences, attitudes, habits, and income, and sort of dictates these in totality through a food environment, which means physical, economic, policy, and socio-cultural access is dictating the diet that we are consuming. Thus, the diet is shaped by the food industry, the government, the society, and also the interaction between individual factors and the food environment. And now that we understand the concept of food environment, let us see how nutrition transition accompanied the food environment transition as well. So in pattern one, as we remember from the previous slide, we were hunter and gatherer society. So that was the time when we were relying only on the wild food environment. Pattern two, when there was early agrarian society, wherein we were subsistence farmers, we were still relying on wild, and we had additionally the cultivated food environment. Then in pattern three, where trade started, and that is where the informal markets emerged along with the natural food environment. Then in pattern four, where we are developing peri-urban and urban societies, a lot of reliance is there on the informal and the formal food markets. And in pattern five, we do see a existence of formal food markets in the societies. Pattern six might be thought about, wherein we bring back the cultivated food environment along with the formal food environment to have a balance of food coming from both natural as well as the built food environment. So food environment transition and NCD risk. So as we can see from the previous slide, how our food environment has transitioned from a purely natural food environment to a purely built food environment. And that has led to the exposure of the population to a kind of food environment that sort of adds on to the risk of non-communicable diseases. So if we can see, the food access and the portion sizes and the cost are actually dictating the food quality and the quantity. There is increased portion sizes and decreased cost of packaged restaurant and takeaway foods, which are leading to consumption of lot of processed food. And there is increased cost of fresh produce, which is leading to a decreased consumption of fresh foods in the societies. Urbanization, urban design, and the built food environment is leading to reduced reliance on the smallholder and the homegrown foods and greater reliance on bought foods. Increased ease of access to unhealthy foods which are available, and along with globalization and all, as we can see, we have access to cheaper calorie sources which are not nutrient dense. The industrial food processing also exposing us to several kinds of foods which are processed and have ingredients which may add on to the risk of non-communicable diseases. On the other hand, promotion of unhealthy foods through food advertising and lack of check in terms of regulations and all is leading to exposure of the younger age group population to all kinds of wrong foods which are not healthy and leading to exposure to the risk of non-communicable diseases from the earlier years of life. The food systems, on the other hand, its greater and near universal is leading to a greater and near universal access to processed and unhealthy foods. Traditional or local diets are being increasingly replaced, and homogenization of diets that are higher in saturated fats, salts, and sugars, and lower in micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. Transition of this food environment is thus associated with the rise in overweight, obesity, and diet-related non-communicable diseases. So globally, the diets are neither healthy nor nutritious. Globally, diets low in whole grains are the most significant dietary risk factor for deaths and morbidity. The other top five rankings consist of dietary risk factors for diets low in fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, and diets high in sodium. The deaths and morbidities are mainly comprised of non-communicable diseases, including cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and cancer. And these estimates suggest that not eating healthy is more detrimental to health status rather than eating unhealthy foods. Let us now shift our discussion towards how food systems are intrinsically connected to environment. We all understand that the central paradigm of survival is maintenance of the integral synergism between humans and their environment. Food systems both contribute to environmental change and are themselves vulnerable to its effects. Global food production, influenced from the changing eating habits, as we have seen in the previous slides, is the biggest way how humans are pressurizing Earth and threatening the local ecosystems. Unsustainable food productions and consumption practices, again evident from our previous slides, where we are consuming a lot of processed foods, foods that are procured from longer distances, they are processed, their natural composition is changed, are all leading to environmental degradation and are exacerbating climate change. In turn, food systems themselves suffer from climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Let us now understand a bit more about the environmental impact of food systems. Different food groups affect the environment to different extents. Animal source foods are responsible for about three-quarters of climate change effects, whereas staple foods like or the staple crops such as wheat, rice, and other cereals are responsible for a third to a half of the pressures on other environmental domains. Based on the current scenario, it is projected that food production could increase greenhouse gas emission, cropland use, freshwater use, and nitrogen and phosphorus applications by 50 to 90% from 2010 to 2050 in the absence of dedicated mitigation measures. This slide provides an overview of the environmental implications of our food systems. And in the red circles, we can see the various elements of our food system. So resources and waste recovery, food production, distribution and aggregation, food processing, marketing, purchasing, and finally consumption. So at each stage, we can see how our food systems elements can have an impact on the environment. For example, the food wastes that are there in the landfills can generate a lot of methane. Improper disposal of the food waste can lead to air and water pollution. On the other hand, if we are producing food not in a sustainable manner, it can lead to deforestation, biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emission, impact the soil health, and lead to water pollution. On the other hand, if in our food system we are using a lot of fuel and we have long food supply chains, in the distribution and aggregation, there happens air pollution because of the larger food miles and type of the fuel being used for the distribution purpose. On the other hand, the way we are cooking food, we are purchasing food, our specific food choices have an implication on the environment and the way we are impacting the environment by various components of our food systems. And this brings us to explore the nexus between environmental change, dietary choices, food systems, nutrition, and non-communicable diseases. The relationship amongst these factors are complex and multidirectional. First, the global dietary transition featuring a growing demand for both dietary animal products and processed foods, has direct health consequences as well as environmental consequences that indirectly affect health. Second, environmental changes affect agricultural productivity, threatening the nutritional status in some regions with implications for non-communicable diseases. So if you see here in this particular figure, the dietary choices leading to health consequences and environmental consequences have overall impact on the food systems, and all these interactions are bidirectional. So let us look at the pathways of impact on environment and food systems and non-communicable diseases. We'll start with the climate impacts. These will include sea level rise, surface temperature increase, extreme events, and increased greenhouse gas emissions. This will lead to environmental impacts like flooding, groundwater contamination, altered rainfall patterns, ecosystem changes, species loss, and several other factors. All these will in turn affect the food systems. Food systems will have reduced agricultural yields, increased demand, and sales of non-perishable, high-fat, salt, sugar processed foods. So, the food system's impact will lead to impaired food and nutrition security. That will lead to reduced dietary diversity, poor quality diets, decreased consumption of healthy traditional foods, increased consumption of low nutrient, energy dense, highly processed foods. And this will increase the risk of non-communicable diseases in the form of high prevalence of overweight, obesity, hypertension, low birth weight, and malnutrition in childhood, metabolic syndromes, hyperglycemia, hyperlipidemia, and several other non-communicable disease risk factors, leading to increased burden of diet-related non-communicable diseases. And with the increased burden of diet-related non-communicable diseases, there will be an increased burden on the health system. And as a result of which, and also further, the increased prevalence of the risk factors of NCD will also add on to this increased burden. On the other hand, the impacts of the separate factors like the environmental impact will lead to reduced physical activity and increased salination of the water, which might lead to directly affect the increased burden of non-communicable diseases. On the other hand, environmental impact may also lead to increased migration and forced migration from the traditional communities to the urban neighborhoods, as a result of which these populations may also face impaired food and nutrition security. So, after understanding the nexus between environmental change, food systems, and non communicable diseases, let us understand a bit more about the close relationship between food systems and the Sustainable Development Goals. Transforming food systems is the most powerful way to make progress towards Sustainable Development Goals. And this is especially true of Goal 2, which calls for ending malnutrition and ensuring access to safe and nutritious foods globally by 2030. The unsustainable expansion of agriculture can have serious environmental issues, including soil erosion, water pollution through agrochemicals, and greenhouse gas emissions. And disasters such as droughts, landslides, and floods can greatly affect food security, and these becoming more frequent and intense due to the climate change. Thus, environmental considerations are critical and essential to achieve all targets of the Sustainable Development Goal 2, which includes universal access to safe and nutritious foods, ending all forms of malnutrition, double the productivity and income of small scale food producers, sustainable food production and resilient agriculture practices, and maintaining the diversity of food production. Thus, sustainable food systems promote food and nutrition security for all. It safeguards ecological, social, cultural, and economic basis of food security, thereby ensuring availability for future generations. This requires both minimizing negative environmental impact and fostering socio-economic welfare. Sustainable food systems must protect and respect rather than exploit ecosystems, biodiversity, social equity, and human well being. And it should be centered around fair, culturally acceptable, nutritionally adequate, healthy foods that conserve natural resources and which includes local and indigenous knowledge. And thus, sustainable diets are the diets that are with low environmental impacts, which contribute to food and nutrition security, to healthy life, to present and future generations. Sustainable diets are protective and respectful of biodiversity and ecosystem. They are culturally acceptable, accessible, economically fair and affordable, nutritionally adequate, safe and healthy, while optimizing natural and human resources. And we can confidently say that sustainable food systems can lower non-communicable disease risks with environmental co-benefits. How? They can improve availability, affordability, and uptake of nutritious, safe, affordable, and sustainable diets. They can shape eating habits and shift demand and consumption towards healthier foods. They can improve the access of at-risk groups to healthy diets. They can reduce early mortality. They can reduce diet related greenhouse gas emissions and land use, reduce environmental footprints, and aid in climate change mitigation. With this, I'll finish this introductory presentation. Shall be happy to take up questions. My email will be shared with you by the course coordinator. Thank you. And here are some references at the end of the presentation. Thank you.